commission, at our board meeting, to send the proposed regulation out for notice.
Gave a notice of
We gave a
public
notice.
hearing and comment.
Okay, thank you. We gave a notice of it. I know what we did. We gave notice of a public hearing and comment. And so this is the public hearing at which we will discuss it. So what I need to do is I need to read this. Is that correct? So therefore, I do as instructed. So this hearing is being held by the Health Policy Commission to receive public comment on the proposed regulations 958 CMR 10.00 performance improvement plans and the associated performance improvement plan forms and instructions. The purpose of today's hearing is to receive comments from the public rather than to engage in discussion or answer questions. Any person wishing to record today's hearing must speak with HPC's Chief of Staff, Colleen, prior to doing so. This hearing is being recorded by the Commission. The audio recording will be posted online. A sign-up sheet is available by the door for persons wishing to present oral testimony. The Commission will determine an order for testimony. Please listen for your name or your organization's panel to be called. You may provide oral testimony only once. Please focus your testimony on the proposed regulations and associated forms and instructions and limit your remark to 3 minutes. Remarks made by groups of no more than 4 will be limited to 10 minutes. Persons presenting oral testimony are encouraged to submit a written copy of their testimony as well. Anyone who wants to submit written testimony should send submissions to hpc-regulations@state.ma.us or to Lois Johnson, General Counsel, at the mailing address included on the hearing notice. All written testimony must be received by 5 p.m. today, March 15th. All testimony is given equal weight, whether written or oral. Please note that all written or oral comments submitted to the Commission may be posted on the Commission's website and released in response to a request for public records. When we call you up to testify, please state your name and identify the organization you are representing if applicable. Conventionally elected and appointed officials are given precedence to testify at public hearings. They will be listed first if they sign in. Okay. So just to reiterate points here, we tried to do this as openly and as deliberatively as possible, so we're interested in hearing anyone's comments, whether oral or written, so please understand that that is okay. So before we get started, let me just see if Greg want to add anything, or if you want to add anything. Okay.
I'll just provide a couple of just introductory comments before we turn over to the testimony. I'll share with you our current list of people who signed up. As commissioners, as you well know, the performance improvement plans process is one of the key mechanisms in Chapter 224 by which the HPC can enforce the benchmark and ensure accountability to the Commonwealth's cost containment goals. As you know, we have been currently operating under an interim guidance that was issued to govern this process that was issued last March. We have engaged in a very deliberative process in the development of this regulation over the course of the past 12 months, culminating in this public comment here today. So we're excited to hear from different stakeholders as to their input into the regulations. We really think about the performance improvement plans as an opportunity for the HPC to work with payers and providers to address their cost growth and to pursue collaborative best strategies to address them. Really is an opportunity for the Commission to help move our cost containment goals forward. We commonly think about reflecting the performance of the entire state. In this process, we are trying to understand the performance of individual organizations, whether they be providers or health plans. And so I won't walk through all of the many steps that go into this process, but just in order of quick review, we do receive a confidential list of identified entities from CHIA whose cost growth is excessive and threatens the benchmark. At that time, the HPC conducts a review of those entities across a number of different factors and identifies entities that we believe a performance improvement plan is warranted to the commission. At that point, the commission votes. The board needs to vote in order to require an entity to file a performance improvement plan. They have some time then to develop a performance improvement plan that would include information about what are their key cost drivers are, what are the strategies that they are proposing to put in place to address them, the timeline by which they expect to achieve success, and the measures by which we will hold them accountable, and other information that's laid out both in the regulation and for interested parties. We also did post a draft form of what we would expect so identified providers and payers to submit information to the HPC, and that is also something we're seeking comment and feedback on it as well. At that point, the board will receive a performance improvement plan from the provider or payer, and the board then again would need to vote to approve that with a likelihood of success that it will address the underlying cost drivers. And then the entity implements that plan up to an 18-month timetable, during which we expect engagement with the Health Policy Commission. We have the opportunity to actually provide technical assistance and support to that entity in order to help them achieve success under that plan. And at the conclusion of that timetable, or however identified by the provider, it comes back to the board again for a vote to say whether this plan was successful in achieving the targets that it set out to do, or whether additional steps may be necessary. So all of those steps that I just laid out are kind of point by point, both in the statute and in the regulation that is out for proposal. So wanted to just orient ourselves to this process before we begin today's testimony.
Just to reiterate what David said, we spent an enormous amount of time last year going through the first version of this, and we had a number of very helpful discussions with members of the healthcare community about it, and then spent quite a lot of time reflecting on that and how to modify our proposed regulations and forms and things. So we're quite eager to hear comment. Great, please.
Dave, just one question. Can you just outline the timetable for us as commission members in terms of the process, getting the list from GIA, the confidential list, reviewing who's on it, determining whether we're going to require a performance improvement plan, that sort of thing?
Sure. Kara, why don't you?
Sure. So the new data that the list is based on comes into CHIA in May. It usually takes them a few months to clean it and polish and then develop the list. So we would typically get that in the fall. We didn't this past year because they were revising the methodology by which they would refer entities to us, so there was a public comment process there. That's taken a little bit more time, but in general, we would expect to receive that list in the fall. It would take us a few months to review the entities, do any follow-up necessary. We would then, if the board voted to require a performance improvement plan, they would have that vote, the entity would receive notice. They then have 45 days to submit a performance improvement plan proposal, although there's an opportunity for extension. And then the board would in theory vote to approve, and implementation would begin immediately. Up to 18 months, could be shorter based on the nature of the plan, and then the board's determination as to whether or not it's successful.
And the specific outcome then of this meeting is a set of comments to us. Then you take these comments and help guide us in our review of the proposed regulation. Whereupon, what happens? What's the formal process at that point?
Sure, so we will review the comments that were submitted. We may make updates to the regulation or to the forms document based on those comments, and then currently I believe there's a CTMP and a board meeting scheduled for Wednesday the 29th. Based on the number and type of comments received, if we're ready, we'll bring those back for the committee and the board's consideration in 2 weeks, or if we get more comment or more complex comments to resolve in April.
So one possibility is that the board formalizes the regulation on the 29th. I'm saying that has to, but that's one possibility that could result from this. Correct. Okay, let me then first ask, are there any elected or appointed officials who would like to testify? Is that correct? That's what I heard. Great. Okay, In terms of people who've signed up to testify publicly, Eric Linzer has signed up, so Eric, please come forward. And why don't, although you wrote the organization here, why don't you introduce yourself for the audience as well?
Thank you, Chairman Cutler. For the record, my name is Eric Linzer. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Massachusetts Association of Health Plans. We're a trade organization that represents 17 health plans that provide coverage to 2.6 million Massachusetts residents. Here today to speak on behalf of our thoughts on proposed regulation 958 CMR 10, the performance improvement plans. Let me start first by commending the committee as well as the commission on the approach that you've taken with the regulations. This has been an incredibly complex process, and we feel that the regs are, while they're an important step in ensuring accountability in the healthcare system, you have also taken a very balanced approach in the measures and provisions that you've outlined in the regulations. We think this will be an important step in making sure that healthcare becomes more affordable for employers and consumers. With that, I just want to start by saying that our member plans recognize the importance of making healthcare more affordable, and they are doing everything they can to provide greater relief to employers and consumers. But ultimately, premiums reflect the price of care. The increases that we've seen in prescription drug prices, coupled by the consolidation and ensuing increases in prices charged by providers, will continue to threaten the cost benchmark, as evidenced by multiple state reports, including the Commission's most recent annual cost trends report. With regard to that, we think that there are a handful of factors that the Commission ought to take into consideration as it thinks about the types of entities or the entities that would be subject to a PIP process. And specifically, I want to focus my comments first on section 10.042, which are the elements that would be considered for whether or not an entity should be required to engage in a PIP. And I think we'll focus really on three items, and you heard us speak about some of this at last week's benchmark hearing. So first is obviously the issue of prescription drug prices. As we know, multiple state reports have pointed to the increases in prices as a major factor in the reason why the states failed to meet the cost benchmark the last 2 years. At the same time, CHIA has pointed to the fact that our experience here in Massachusetts is not unique and is actually fairly consistent with the national experience. To that end, we would urge the Commission that, as it thinks about and determines what entities should be required to engage in a PIP, to keep this under consideration as to the impact of rising prescription drug prices. Likewise, the issue of provider consolidation, as the Commission's recent report pointed out, you've dealt with roughly 72 material change notices in the last 3+ years, most of which have looked at issues related to acquisitions, affiliations, consolidations, and while you've done an outstanding job in this area and very thorough approach, there's only been a handful of CMIRs that have taken place. Recognizing that the consolidations that are going on, we would urge the Commission, as it thinks about, again, entities that should be or may be required to go through a PIP, special attention should be given to elements such as what are those entities' results in relation to the cost benchmark? Are they utilizing their newfound leverage to increase prices? And is the increased concentration resulting in difficulty in the state addressing and meeting the cost benchmark? And Commissioner Cutler, I know on a number of occasions as this has gone through this process, you've articulated some of these issues as well. Finally, the issue of changes with the ACA. I don't need to tell this group or the audience what the ACA changes could mean to Massachusetts. I would only offer a word of caution as we think about the PIP process, that the potential changes and how that may affect different populations and enrollment aspects, and how that may affect different elements throughout total healthcare expenditures, to keep that in mind as you consider entities that would go through PIP. Finally, I want to speak on two other elements, specifically 958 CMR 10.102 and CMR 1013.3. These are deal with details as to whether or not to approve a proposed PIP and whether or not a proposed PIP has been successful. Now, whether you take this as part of proposed regs, the application, or think about it in the context of reviewing these elements, we think that there should be some additional elements spelled out, specifically what changes an entity has seen in relation to things such as relative price, total medical expense, how funds are being distributed between and among different providers throughout an institution. So are funds flowing to primary care physicians? Are they going to specialists? Are they going to behavioral health? What other measures have been taken to address some of the recommendations that the Commission has recently outlined, such as around readmissions? And then finally, the entity's cost structure in relation to its competitors. We think that's an important component, and while much has been done in this space, particularly with CHIA and some of its reporting around both hospitals as well as systems issues, there certainly should be more discussion as to entities that potentially may go through a PIP. If you're going to approve a PIP and determine it to be successful, there should be some element of looking at what that entity has done to really address some of its own cost structures. With that, we will be submitting written comments following in advance of today's 5 p.m. deadline, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
We're not supposed to engage in debate, but I think we first make sure to
We've got like an hour, so I don't know what else signed up. So.
Carrie, do you have any questions about the specific comments? I thought they were all very helpful comments.
Can I ask a question, Eric? Are you suggesting that we require a PIP for the pharmaceutical companies? Do we have the authority?
Well, I think there's a question of, there could be a question of the authority. I think as we outlined in our comments last week as part of the benchmark, we certainly agree with the Commission's view that the statute should be expanded to include pharma and biotech companies as part of the cost trends hearings. They should be subject to PIP. At the same time, at least as it relates to the hearings, we do feel like that there is some catch-all language included in the statute that gives the Commission some discretion to invite those entities to participate in the cost trends hearings. I think it's probably an open question as to whether or not they've accepted your invitation in the past.
Thank you, sir. There are no more names on the list of individuals who indicated they wish to offer public testimony. So let me then ask, is there anyone else who wants to speak? In the absence of anyone, then I think that we'll officially end this, and then I think with Eric's written comments and oral testimony, let's see if we can try to get to a position by March 29th where we can finalize the regulations. David, is there anything else we need to cover here?
I don't think so.
Very good. Thank you, everyone.